Right now, 5 different airlines are all telling you they fly the world's longest flight. Singapore Airlines, Singapore to New York, 18 hours, 40 minutes, nonstop. Xiamen Air, New York to Fuzhou, 19 hours, 20 minutes. China Eastern, Buenos Aires to Shanghai, 29 hours. Qantas, Sydney to London, 22 hours, launching next year. And an Airbus A350 that flew Melbourne to Toulouse, 24 hours, 23,000 kilometers, no passengers. Every one of those is true. None of them is the same flight, and that isn't a mistake. Look, one twist explains everything you're about to see. The flight holding the record right now won it by flying around something, not through it. And in the opposite direction, that same flight doesn't even make the top of the list. There is no single world's longest flight. There are 5 categories, and every airline picked the one it could win. By the end of this video, you'll know all 5. You'll know which record changed hands last October that almost nobody has caught up to. And you'll know why the longest flight ever flown by a passenger jet carried absolutely no passengers. Let's start with the one everyone still gets wrong. Search for the world's longest flight today, and you'll be told it's Singapore Airlines. Singapore to New York. Every aviation video with more than 100,000 views says so. It stopped being true in October 2025. The airline that took the crown is one most people have never heard of. Xiamen Air, a mid-sized Chinese carrier out of Fujian province, on the country's southeast coast. It isn't one of China's big 3 international airlines. It flies twice a week from New York's JFK to Fuzhou, a city with such a large community in New York that there's a neighborhood there people actually call Little Fuzhou. 19 hours, 20 minutes. It beat Singapore Airlines by 10 minutes. And it didn't do it with a specialized aircraft. Xiamen uses a Boeing 7879, a stock Dreamliner, the same jet dozens of airlines fly on ordinary mid-range routes. No extra fuel tanks, no custom variant. It didn't do it by flying further either. New York to Fuzhou is about 12,500 kilometers. Singapore to New York is over 15,000. The shorter route takes longer. The reason comes down to airspace. Xiamen Air does not fly over Russia. Since 2022, Russian airspace has been closed to most Western carriers, and Xiamen avoids it too. To get from New York to Fuzhou without crossing it, the aircraft swings wide and south around an entire country's worth of sky. That detour is the record, and you can prove it by looking at the airlines that still do overfly Russia. Air China, China Southern, China Eastern, Cathay Pacific. Cathay's flight from JFK back to Hong Kong, similar distance, similar ocean, a city just up the coast from Fuzhou, is scheduled at about 16 hours, 25 minutes. 3 hours shorter, same journey, different politics. Take away one airspace closure, and the world's longest flight instantly drops several places down the list. The record was won by a diplomatic problem, not by better engines, aerodynamics, or a longer range airframe. The world's longest passenger flight is only the longest because of a country it isn't allowed to fly over. And it gets stranger because that record only exists in one direction. Same airline, same aircraft, same 2 airports. New York to Fuzhou, 19 hours, 20 minutes. Fuzhou to New York, 14 hours, 35 minutes, nearly 5 hours shorter going home. That's the jet stream, the band of high-altitude wind that races west to east across the northern hemisphere. Fly into it, and it fights you the whole way. Fly with it, and it carries you. It's the same reason New York to London takes about 7 hours and the flight back takes closer to 8. On the Xiamen route, that difference is so extreme the same physical distance takes roughly a third, longer westbound than east. Hold the world record flying one way, and you can be completely unremarkable flying back. Then, there's the second crack in the crown. That 19 hours and 20 minutes is what the industry calls block time, the scheduled duration from the moment the aircraft's brakes come off at one gate to the moment they go back on at the other. And airlines pad it, buffer for taxiing, for holding patterns, for congestion at both ends, so the flight lands on time more often than it doesn't. Reports put the actual airborne time on Xiamen's westbound flight closer to 17 hours, which means the world record is partly an engineering achievement and partly a decision made by a scheduling department about how much cushion to write into a timetable. The world's longest flight is 19 hours in one direction, 14 in the other, and about 17 in reality. Ask most travelers what the world's longest flight is, and plenty will name China Eastern. Buenos Aires to Shanghai, 29 hours. They're right, by one definition. 29 hours genuinely is the longest amount of time you can spend on a single flight number anywhere in commercial aviation. It launched on the 4th of December, 2025, with 282 passengers on the inaugural service. 2 departures a week, a Boeing 777-300ER with 316 seats. And notice something, because we just learned to look for it. Buenos Aires to Shanghai is 29 hours. Shanghai to Buenos Aires is about 25 and a half. Even the 29-hour record only counts in one direction. But there's a bigger catch. It lands halfway. The flight stops in Auckland, New Zealand for about 2 hours. The aircraft is refueled, cleaned, and restocked. Crews change over, and then the journey continues to Shanghai. One flight number, one aircraft. By China Eastern's definition, one direct flight, and that's the word they use, direct, not nonstop. By any passenger's definition, that's two flights with a shared booking. Honestly, what makes it interesting is the geography. Auckland is very nearly the only choice. Look at where Buenos Aires and Shanghai sit on a globe. They're almost exactly opposite each other. Antipodes. As far apart as 2 points on this planet can physically be. Roughly 20,000 kilometers, and no clever routing helps because from there, every direction is the same distance. That's beyond the range of every airliner in production today. The route falls in the impossible column of the map, and unlike every other intercontinental corridor, there's no stepping stone. Europe to Asia has the Gulf hubs. North America to Asia has Anchorage and Tokyo. The North Atlantic has Iceland and Ireland. Between South America and East Asia lies the largest empty space on the planet, the South Pacific, and almost nothing in it has a runway long enough, a fuel supply big enough, or the ground crews to turn a wide body. Everything else out there is a coral atoll with a strip of concrete. So Auckland is the stop. The aircraft even takes an unusual southerly path down toward Antarctica because that curve saves hours. Travelers who've flown the full sector describe something that stops feeling like air travel. 4 meal services, economy fares around $1,400, and a cabin overwhelmingly full of people doing the entire distance. China Eastern calls the route an Air Silk Road, a southbound corridor between Asia and South America that, until this launched, simply didn't exist. The alternatives ran through Paris or Amsterdam and took over 30 hours. That's the world's longest flight that had to borrow somebody else's continent. Which brings us to the strangest record on the list. The longest a passenger jet has ever flown carried exactly 0 passengers. The 27th of July, 2026, an Airbus A350-1000 ULR took off from Melbourne. It flew east, across the entire Pacific, across North America, across the Atlantic, and it landed in Toulouse, France 24 hours and 24 minutes later, having covered just over 23,000 kilometers without stopping. More than 120,000 people tracked it live as it came in. It broke a record set back in 2005 by a Boeing 777-200LR, which flew about 21,500 kilometers in 22 hours and 42 minutes. That one had no passengers either. The record for the longest flight in aviation history has changed hands twice. Both times, the plane was empty. The Melbourne flight was a certification test, the final validation before Qantas launches Project Sunrise, its non-stop service from Sydney to London. And what it costs to hold that record with actual people on board is the part worth sitting with. Standard A350, 1,000 seats, well over 400 passengers. The Project Sunrise version seats 238, nearly half the aircraft given away. Some of that space went to first-class suites and business beds. Some went to a dedicated well-being zone between the cabins, an open area with stretch handles and guided exercise programs, because 238 people sitting still for 22 hours is a medical problem as much as a comfort one. The rest is fuel, because fuel weighs something, and carrying enough to stay airborne for 22 hours means burning fuel just to carry your fuel. The final hours of range are always the most expensive ones to buy. So Qantas has to charge for it. Group CEO Vanessa Hudson has said fares will run around 20% above the one-stop alternatives. Tickets go on sale in February 2027. Service starts that October, which means the record for the longest scheduled passenger flight is set to change hands again before this video is a year old. But these routes are more fragile than the marketing suggests. Singapore Airlines flew nonstop to Newark once before, from 2004 all the way to 2013. Then fuel prices moved. The 4-engine aircraft it used burned roughly 40% more fuel than what eventually replaced it, and the airline canceled the route outright. For 5 straight years, nobody flew it at all. The record simply stopped existing. The longest flight ever flown carried nobody, and the longest one coming gave away half its seats to exist. The actual world's longest flight depends entirely on which question you're asking. Longest in the air on a scheduled service. A Chinese airline most people have never heard of, holding the title by 10 minutes, by flying around a country it can't fly over, in one direction only. Longest by distance. A Singapore Airlines jet that doesn't carry a standard economy cabin. Longest total journey. 29 hours that lands halfway because the two cities are as far apart as two places on Earth can be. Longest ever flown, an empty test flight into Toulouse. Longest coming, a route that doesn't exist yet and had to sacrifice half its seats to be possible. 5 records, 5 holders, 5 definitions of one word, and nobody is technically lying. The record works as a category. It gets redrawn every single time somebody needs to win it. The world's longest flight is whichever definition an airline can currently win, and it changes the moment someone redraws the line.